I didn't say a word when they handed me the eviction notice. I just slid the 1923 water rights deed across the table. Then I sat back and watched 35 McMansions become lakefront property. The Willowbrook Estates HOA thought they could take my grandfather's farm while I was deployed in Afghanistan. These arrogant bureaucrats built their perfect suburban dream on stolen land. They filled it with tennis outfit Karens patrolling around in golf carts. What they didn't know was that I'm an Army Corps engineer. That little earth dam on my property had been waiting 45 years for someone dumb enough to build downstream. Their audacity was unbelievable. But it all made sense the day those spillway gates opened. Their luxury development got its first real taste of natural flooding. And for me, it was deeply satisfying. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because you're about to witness the most beautiful HOA takedown involving federal water law and gravity. Let me introduce myself. I'm Jake Morrison. I'm 34 years old. I work with the Army Corps of Engineers. And I'm the third-generation owner of 47 acres of prime Texas land just outside Austin. My grandfather, who we all called Pops, bought this property back in 1955. Back then, Austin was just a sleepy college town. Barbecue joints outnumbered tech companies by 1,000 to 1. Pops believed in taking care of the land and the people living on it. In 1978, he built a small earth dam on our property. Nothing too fancy, just good engineering. It was designed to collect rainwater for our cattle and to help out neighbors downstream during dry spells. The Army Corps of Engineers even helped him with the design. Pops always said that someday the back 40 acres would be worth something special. For now, it was just beautiful rolling land where we ran cattle and I learned to hunt. Then came my 2 tours in Afghanistan. I specialized in water management and infrastructure. Turns out, building wells and managing water flow in a war zone teaches you how precious clean water is, and how fast people are willing to fight over it. While I was on my second deployment, Pops passed away. The land went into a trust managed by my well-meaning, but overwhelmed sister, Sarah. She lives in California. She knows as much about Texas land law as I know about surfing. She hired a local property management company called Lawn-Ear Land Services to handle taxes and upkeep. The property taxes were paid automatically. But here's the thing, Sarah never actually looked at the tax assessments. That was a huge mistake. Enter our villain, Margaret Maggie Thornwell. She's 52 years old. She's president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. She drives a white BMW X7 and treats tennis outfits like business casual. She's mastered the passive-aggressive charm that Southern women seem to perfect by age 45. The kind where they smile sweetly while stabbing you in the back. And somehow make it sound like they're doing you a favor. Maggie's married to City Councilman Rick Thornwell. That should tell you everything about how she gets things done. She's known for neighborhood beautification initiatives. That's a fancy way of saying she pushes out anyone who doesn't fit her ideal of suburban perfection. Her expensive perfume can't quite cover the constant trail of cigarette smoke and entitlement she drags behind her. I came home from deployment in August 2023. I was ready to finally spend some real time on Pop's land. I drove down the familiar gravel road past the old oak tree where I'd carved my initials as a kid. I expected to see the same rolling pastures and that little earth dam sparkling under the Texas sun. Instead, I found construction crews. Concrete trucks. Survey stakes scattered across the back 40 like an invading force. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt different. Heavier. Angrier. I could taste the dust and my own rising rage as I walked up to the construction foreman. "Sorry, buddy," he said, without sounding sorry at all. "We've got permits. This is Willowbrook Estates property now." I called the police. Officer Martinez showed up and tried explaining, clearly uncomfortable. The HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was overseas. Apparently, if land sits unused for a while and someone improves it, they can claim ownership under certain laws. It's an old rule meant to keep land from sitting empty forever. but developers and HOAs have twisted it into a land-grabbing weapon. That's when Maggie rolled up in her golf cart like a suburban warlord. Her voice had that syrupy charm that instantly made me want to check if my wallet was still in my pocket. "Your family abandoned this land, honey," she said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. "We're just putting it to good use for the community." But what really made my blood boil? I discovered her construction crews had diverted the small creek that feeds Pop's Dam. The water level was already dropping. Every single day, the water level dropped. And with it, 45 years of careful water management disappeared. That dam had helped our neighbors through droughts, floods, and everything in between. As I stood there watching the creek run dry, Maggie's parting words echoed in my ears. "You should have stayed closer to home, soldier boy." That's when I realized, this wasn't just about land. This was war. I hired the first attorney I could find. Big mistake. He quoted me $85,000 just to challenge the zoning change. Turns out, while I was serving my country, Maggie's husband Rick pushed through an emergency zoning modification. My family's land went from agricultural pre-validation to residential development zoning, faster than you can say, conflict of interest. But here's where my Army Corps training paid off. While that overpriced lawyer shuffled papers and billed hours, I dug through county records like I was back in Afghanistan hunting for IEDs. And just like in the war zone, the devil was in the details. I found Pop's original 1978 dam construction permits. And they were beautiful. He didn't just build the dam himself. He worked directly with the Army Corps of Engineers for flood control and watershed management. That meant federal jurisdiction. Here's your first knowledge nugget. Any dam built with federal guidance falls under federal jurisdiction. Local HOAs can't override that. Period. A metallic taste hit my tongue as I realized what I'd found. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was a federal case. But wait, it gets better. While photocopying documents at the courthouse, I stumbled across a 1923 water rights deed buried in the archives. My great-grandfather had purchased senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. These rights were older than the city, older than the county's municipal water system, older than every single one of those McMansions sitting on my land. They weren't just stealing my property. They were stealing my water. Meanwhile, Maggie was busy playing the victim. She organized an emergency HOA meeting about the dangerous dam. She even tipped off a local news crew in advance. I watched her on the evening news standing on her perfectly trimmed lawn. She spoke about children's safety and neighborhood security. "We're just concerned about our children's safety," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "That dam looks ready to burst, and we have families living right downstream." The thing about local news is, they love drama but rarely do follow-up research. Had they bothered, they'd know the dam had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors. But Maggie wasn't done. She took to the next door app, that digital throne room of petty HOA politics. Her post warned about aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals in the area. She didn't name me, but she didn't need to. In a community that small, everyone knew who she meant. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with cedar pollen hung in the August air. Every evening, I stood on my porch watching their crews work double shifts. They were racing to finish construction before I could get any legal injunction. Every night, I counted new foundations being poured. Every night, the water level in Pop's Dam dropped another inch. That's when I called Tony Riggs, my old Army buddy. He now works for the EPA's Enforcement Division. In 20 minutes on the phone, I learned more about environmental law than I had in 3 hours with that expensive lawyer. "Jake," Tony said, "if they're diverting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. And if my dam had federal jurisdiction." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I started documenting everything. Trail cameras around the perimeter. Time-stamped photos of every diversion. Flow measurements at 3 creek points. My sister Sarah called from California, begging me to take the settlement offer. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about the crunch of construction boots on stolen soil. The echo of Maggie's heels across courthouse marble. The bitter taste of courthouse coffee during zoning hearings I should never have had to attend. But most of all, it was about that dam. Pops built it to help the community. For 45 years, it had sustained life downstream. Now Maggie's crew was turning it into a decorative pond for luxury homes. Here's the thing about Texas water rights, they're older than oil rights, older than mineral rights, and much harder to steal. But you have to know how to fight for them. As I watched yet another concrete truck pass my kitchen window, something clicked. This wasn't a battle I'd win with lawyers and legal briefs. This was going to be one with engineering. Maggie escalated. She formed a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members in matching polos stationed themselves at my gate. They photographed visitors, recorded license plates, filed sheriff reports about suspicious activity. It was textbook harassment. Noise complaints about my farm radio. Citations for my fully functional 1962 farmhouse. Reports of environmental hazards about a septic system that passed inspection just 6 months earlier. Then came the worst. Rick, using his city council seat, ordered a wellness check on me. Apparently, I was a troubled veteran who might pose a risk. The social worker who visited was apologetic, but thorough. She checked every box on her clipboard while Maggie watched from her golf cart like it was a military inspection. Then came the full-on bureaucratic assault. The building inspector, the fire marshal, the health department, animal control, all showed up on the same day. Each found minor violations that required expensive fixes. The building inspector, Rick's drinking buddy, said my porch needed $8,000 in foundation work. It was the same playbook I'd seen in war zones. Overwhelm your enemy with red tape until they break. But I wasn't going to break. While they buried me in paperwork, I made my own calls. Tony at the EPA was shocked to learn Maggie's HOA had never filed the wetlands assessment required to redirect Willow Creek. Any development that changes a natural waterway requires federal environmental clearance, even on private land. The fines start at $50,000 a day. The smell of fresh concrete in the summer heat reminded me each morning that time was running out. But my research was finally paying off. I discovered that the entire development had been built in a 100-year floodplain classified by the Army Corps. Insurance companies had originally denied coverage, until the HOA submitted a flood mitigation plan. The hearing was scheduled in just 2 weeks. Maggie's quote in the paper made her strategy crystal clear. Sometimes you have to protect the community from itself. But as I stood at my bedroom window that night, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, I realized something important. Those weren't just rain clouds. They were opportunity. Maggie went nuclear. Rick fast-tracked the eminent domain hearing, scheduled it for just 2 weeks away. Suddenly, the HOA was offering me $180,000 for property assessed at $890,000. The message was clear. Take the lowball offer, or lose everything. The local newspaper ran a hit piece painting me as a domestic terrorist. The headline read, "Troubled Veteran Blocks Community Progress." They used a photo that made my farmhouse look like a crack den, and me. I looked like I hadn't slept in weeks. But Maggie's masterstroke was the photo op. She staged it with precision. 20 concerned mothers stood near my property line, holding their children. A professional photographer captured their worried expressions while my house loomed in the background. The Facebook post went viral with the hashtag #ProtectOurKids. Our children deserve safe neighborhoods, she told Channel 7 News. Not whatever issues he brought back from war. You know what? She was right about one thing. I did bring something back from war. I brought the ability to recognize when someone's steamrolling you with propaganda, and the engineering skills to do something about it. Then Tony Riggs called with game-changing news. The EPA had already opened a federal investigation into the Willow Creek diversions based on my complaint. But here's the kicker. Maggie's previous HOA in Houston had faced a $2.3 million fine for the exact same scheme. Federal environmental crimes follow individuals, even across jurisdictions. While Maggie played the victim on social media, I uncovered that her entire financial house of cards was built on fraud. The HOA's construction loans were tied to inflated property values. The banks required guaranteed water access to approve those loans. If those water rights reverted back to me, the rightful owner, the entire development would become financially underwater. The irony wasn't lost on me. They stole my water to make their land valuable. Now, their greed was about to drown them. Maggie's panic was showing. She offered me $400,000 cash, no questions asked. The deadline? 48 hours. When I refused, she flew to California to approach my sister Sarah. She gave some sob story about her brother's mental health issues. It backfired spectacularly. Sarah might not know Texas land law, but she knows her brother. She called me laughing. Jake, some crazy lady in tennis clothes just offered to help me with my troubled veteran brother. I told her if she contacts our family again, I'm calling the FBI. While Maggie was busy making enemies, I was making allies. I partnered with environmental lawyer Amanda Cross, who specialized in pro bono water rights cases. Together, we formed a coalition with downstream farmers affected by the creek diversion. Miguel Santos brought historical documents showing his family had used Willow Creek water since 1887. Mrs. Chen contributed photographs of her grandfather's garden from the 1940s, fed by the same creek. Now that water was filling Maggie's decorative fountains. The local Audubon Society got involved when they discovered the diversion had destroyed nesting habitat for several protected bird species. Turns out, killing endangered wildlife while stealing water gets federal attention, fast. During one of my nighttime recon missions, Old Habits Die Hard, I discovered something beautiful. Pops Dam wasn't just a basic earth structure. The original 1978 design included an emergency spillway system with hydraulic gates. They hadn't been opened since 1982. The hollow echo of water moving through those underground channels during my midnight test told me everything I needed. The system was still functional. It was designed for this exact situation, controlled flooding to restore natural flow. I calculated the volume needed to restore Willow Creek to its original path. 2.8 million gallons. The dam was currently holding 3.1 million, thanks to recent rainfall. The math was perfect. But the timing had to be even better. Using my drone, I mapped the exact locations of the new home foundations. 5 houses were built directly in the historical flood channel. 3 more had basements below the seasonal high water mark. Here's the beautiful part. The HOA construction crews had installed decorative creek beds, using concrete and polished stones. They looked pretty, but they weren't designed for actual water flow. Meanwhile, my spillway was designed by the Army Corps of Engineers for real flood management. Then Maggie made her biggest mistake. Her crew started installing permanent concrete barriers. They were trying to block the original creek bed. This would render my spillway system useless and destroy the downstream ecosystem. But it also gave me legal justification. The weather forecast. Heavy September rains. Perfect cover. I filed a notice for emergency dam maintenance. As I stood at the spillway controls at sunset, reading Pop's journal entry about helping neighbors during droughts, the decision crystallized. Time to open the gates. While digging through dusty courthouse records for the 3rd time that week, I found a misfiled document. It changed everything. Hidden behind a stack of 1979 tax assessments was the original agricultural flood management covenant from Pop's Dam construction. The language was clear. Dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural water rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission. It was a legal obligation. It superseded any HOA agreement or zoning ordinance. And Amanda Cross's investigation? It uncovered something even more damning. The insurance applications contained flat-out lies. They claimed there was no seasonal flooding risk. They stated that the permanent creek diversion had been approved by all necessary agencies. That's how they secured $47 million in coverage. Here's your third knowledge nugget. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When you lie to insurance companies about environmental risks, that's federal mail fraud. And it comes with mandatory prison time. The deeper we dug, the more the entire scheme unraveled. Rick Thornwell's construction company wasn't just a contractor. He was the primary investor. Every house built on my stolen land put money directly in his pocket. And here's the kicker. He had never recused himself from a single city council vote that benefited his own project. Tony Riggs shared new EPA findings that made my blood boil. The creek diversion had killed the entire population of Guadalupe bass, a protected species. They had thrived in Willow Creek for generations. Texas Parks and Wildlife had documented the fish kill. But somehow, the report got lost in Rick's office before it could trigger federal prosecution. They weren't just stealing land and water. They were destroying an entire ecosystem. But the real smoking gun came from Amanda's banking contacts. The construction loans were secured with fraudulent environmental assessments. They falsely claimed that the creek diversion was just a temporary construction measure. The banks were told the water would be returned to its natural flow once construction was done. If those water rights reverted to me, the rightful owner, the entire development would violate federal lending regulations. The banks could demand immediate full repayment of $12 million in loans. That's when I found Pop's handwritten journals in the farmhouse attic. One 1980 entry broke my heart. Opened spillway today. Helped the Santos farm and 3 others get through dry spell. That's what neighbors do. The dam was never about profit. It was about community service. Helping people downstream survive droughts. Managing floods to protect everyone. Reading those journals, I realized what Maggie had really stolen. It wasn't just the land. It wasn't just the water. It was 45 years of community cooperation that my grandfather had built. One neighbor at a time. My engineering analysis confirmed what I'd feared. Maggie's creek diversion was creating an upstream flooding hazard. Redirected water would back up into residential areas. The original creek bed had provided natural flood control for the watershed. My dam's spillway was the only system that could safely manage seasonal floods. The pressure was mounting. The September rains were expected to be the heaviest in 7 years. If I waited for the legal system, natural flooding would happen anyway. And it could cause real damage. But if I acted now, I could control it. A controlled spillway release would demonstrate natural flood behavior. It would prove that the HOA development violated federal environmental law. Standing at the spillway controls at sunset, holding Pop's journal, I felt it hit me. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. Restoring the natural order that had sustained the community for generations. Maggie had systematically destroyed that community. Miguel Santos lost his family's century-old farm. Mrs. Chen's ancestral garden had withered. 3 other families had been forced to sell their land under Rick's eminent domain threats. But federal investigators were scheduled to arrive next month. If I could demonstrate the natural flooding pattern before then, we'd have irrefutable proof. The musty smell of hydraulic fluid in the dam's mechanisms reminded me, this equipment was built to last. Pops had designed it for this exact moment, when someone would need to stand up for the creek, and for the people who relied on it. As the storm clouds gathered, I made the decision that would change everything. It was time to honor Pop's legacy. Time to open the gates. But you don't just open a dam without a plan. This wasn't an act of defiance. It was a military operation. With legal cover. With environmental justification. And with community support. First, I assembled my team. Amanda Cross coordinated the legal strategy. She filed additional federal complaints to ensure maximum media attention when the spillway opened. Tony Riggs provided federal cover. He guaranteed EPA investigators would witness our natural flooding demonstration. Miguel Santos documented 40 years of downstream agricultural damage. His historical testimony showed how the creek diversion had destroyed generational farming operations. Mrs. Chen offered her property as a staging area. Her reputation gave the movement credibility. Amanda's legal move was brilliant. She filed an emergency agricultural water rights restoration motion. It argued that I was legally obligated to maintain seasonal flooding. We weren't breaking the law. We were following it. Here's another critical knowledge nugget. Agricultural water rights often supersede residential development rights, especially when supported by historical documentation. My technical prep was pure Army Corps engineering. I created detailed operation plans for the spillway. The release would start at 6 a.m. We'd increase flow gradually over 4 hours. Peak flow at 10 a.m. The volume would replicate natural flood patterns. Enough to expose illegal construction, but not enough to cause structural damage. Except, of course, to Maggie's illegal concrete barriers. Safety was my top priority. I posted 24-hour warning signs. Notified the volunteer fire department. This wasn't a reckless flood. It was a controlled demonstration of natural hydrology. Amanda reached out to environmental journalists from the Austin American-Statesman and local TV. Miguel coordinated community witnesses. Our goal was clear. Control the narrative before Maggie could twist it. Before she could launch her smear campaign, dangerous veteran terrorizes neighborhood. Our intelligence network was like something out of a Cold War novel. Mrs. Chen monitored HOA activity through the neighborhood gossip circuit. Never underestimate retired ladies with time on their hands. Miguel's cousin, the waitress at the local diner, kept us informed about city council meetings. My old army buddy at Fort Hood provided drone surveillance for legal documentation. While I rebuilt spillway controls with modern hydraulics, Amanda launched financial warfare. She tipped off state banking regulators about the construction loan fraud, contacted the Texas Attorney General about insurance fraud, prepared a civil RICO lawsuit against Rick and the HOA board for organized racketeering. The timing was surgical. The Weather Service confirmed heavy rainfall in 72 hours. Amanda scheduled the federal inspection for that exact week. Miguel arranged for the agricultural extension agent to observe downstream restoration. It was the perfect storm. Rainfall, federal oversight, and community support, all converging at the same moment. But I knew Maggie. She always escalated under pressure. So I prepared for every move. Emergency HOA meetings. Media hit pieces. Restraining orders from corrupt judges. Amanda drafted legal responses in advance. We had evidence preservation locked down. I compiled comprehensive photos. Recorded video testimonies. Collected historical maps and aerial photos of the original creek. Amanda submitted it all to federal court. We coordinated with the fire department. Warned local residents in English and Spanish. I even drafted an evacuation plan we wouldn't need, just to prove we were responsible. Amanda's economic strategy was just as lethal. She contacted insurance underwriters about the lies in Maggie's filings, brought state banking regulators into the loop, and prepared a legal bombshell. A civil RICO lawsuit, alleging a pattern of corruption, collusion, and fraud. Here's another knowledge nugget. Coordinated regulatory pressure forces settlements faster than any courtroom battle ever will. Individual lawsuits take time. But when multiple agencies investigate simultaneously, defendants can't fight on all fronts. The smell of WD-40 and machine oil filled the evening air. I serviced all dam equipment and tested the spillway gates under minimal flow. Everything worked perfectly. Pops had built this system to last. I stocked the farmhouse with supplies in case of a potential siege. I knew Maggie would try everything to stop me. Amanda filed protective court orders preventing interference with lawful dam operations. We established secure communications using military-grade encrypted radios. As I stood at the controls for the final equipment check, storm clouds built on the horizon. Everything felt aligned. The weather forecast confirmed heavy rains in 48 hours. Federal investigators would arrive in 36. Maggie was scheduled for her morning show appearance in 24, probably planning another attack on my character. The timing was perfect. Dawn tomorrow would bring justice. And it would bring back 45 years of stolen water to where it belonged. Maggie's desperation hit new levels. She hired private security to patrol my property perimeter. These weren't just rent-a-cops with flashlights. These were tactical gear wannabes. The kind who work private military contracts and think HOA disputes are combat zones. My trail cameras caught them red-handed. They tried to sabotage the spillway control mechanisms at 2 a.m. One genius was on video jamming concrete mix into the hydraulic lines. His buddy stood lookout. Tony Riggs had already tipped off the sheriff's department. Deputy Rodriguez was waiting in the shadows. The arrest was beautiful. Mr. Tactical Vest claimed they were protecting community infrastructure from an unstable individual. But it's hard to explain why you're carrying a bag of quick-set concrete at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maggie's media blitz was even more desperate. She appeared on the Austin Morning Show in her Sunday best. She spoke in that trembling voice politicians use to look like victims. Veterans need mental health support, not weapons, she told the host, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. This man learned to use water as a weapon in Afghanistan. And now he's threatening to wash away children's homes. Rick joined in. He provided expert testimony as a city engineer about catastrophic dam failure risks. Conveniently, he forgot to mention that my dam had passed every inspection for 45 years. But while Maggie played the victim on TV, I was gathering evidence. My surveillance training was paying dividends. I documented every sabotage attempt, every illegal entry, every piece of evidence proving criminal conspiracy. Tony revealed something huge. Federal investigators had been wiretapping Rick's office phone. It was part of an ongoing corruption probe. These people were more desperate than I'd realized. The legal assault came next. Rick fast-tracked an emergency restraining order hearing for 6 a.m., clearly hoping to catch us off guard. Judge Henry Walsh, Rick's golf buddy, agreed to hear it. He'd received $15,000 in campaign donations from Rick's construction company. Amanda discovered the connection and immediately filed a motion for recusal. But we knew the fix was in. If they couldn't stop the spillway legally, they'd stop it through a corrupt judge. Meanwhile, Maggie organized a neighborhood safety patrol. 20 HOA residents showed up with folding chairs, coolers, and "Protect Our Kids" signs. They planned to live stream the spillway opening as an act of environmental terrorism. The optics were perfect for her narrative. Suburban families versus a dangerous veteran with a dam. But Miguel Santos had been busy too. He brought 30 farmers and families to support what we called agricultural water restoration. Mrs. Chen organized a counter-demonstration. She brought historical photos showing the creek in its natural state. Amanda arranged for representatives from the Audubon Society and Sierra Club to attend. Two competing narratives were about to collide. Veteran attacks families versus community protects water rights. Then the sabotage escalated. Security footage revealed someone had poured concrete mix into the spillway channel overnight. It was designed to block water flow and cause flooding if I opened the gates. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was attempted murder disguised as vandalism. I worked through the night with a portable jackhammer, cleared the sabotage, documented every chunk of concrete as evidence. The metallic taste of exhaustion mixed with fury. I realized how far they were willing to go. Rick used his city council emergency powers. He declared my property an imminent public hazard. He authorized the fire department to secure the dangerous dam structure. Fire Chief Martinez, one of the few honest officials left, gave me a heads up. "Jake," he said, "you've got maybe 6 hours before they force me to intervene. Make it count." That's when our final breakthrough arrived. Amanda's fraud reports triggered a state investigation. The Texas Insurance Commission froze all HOA development insurance policies. Without insurance, the construction company faced an immediate work stoppage. The financial pressure finally hit where it hurt: Maggie and Rick's wallets. Tony moved the EPA inspection up by 24 hours due to credible sabotage reports. Federal agents were now en route. They'd arrive at 8 a.m. If the spillway opened during their visit, it would become federal evidence of proper water management. But Maggie's final gambit was the cruelest yet. Comprehensive photos, recorded video testimonies, collected historical maps and aerial photos of the original creek. Amanda submitted it all to federal court. We coordinated with the fire department, warned local residents in English and Spanish. I even drafted an evacuation plan we wouldn't need, just to prove we were responsible. Amanda's economic strategy was just as lethal. She contacted insurance underwriters about the lies in Maggie's filings, brought state banking regulators into the loop, and prepared a legal bombshell. A civil RICO lawsuit, alleging a pattern of corruption, collusion, and fraud. Here's another knowledge nugget. Coordinated regulatory pressure forces settlements faster than any courtroom battle ever will. Your greed tried to erase. The silence that followed was deafening. Not from a lack of sound, but from the weight of truth sinking in. The water whispered through the creek bed like a returning spirit. Mrs. Chen stood beside me and simply said, "Pops would be proud." Miguel laid a single daffodil on the banks. A small tribute to a century of farming, and to the man who had made sure it could continue. Across the field, the Protect Our Kids signs began to come down. The neighborhood safety patrol quietly folded their lawn chairs. The optics had flipped. I was no longer the villain in camouflage. I was the veteran who brought the water home. That evening, the sunset reflected off Willow Creek like fire on glass. I sat on the porch, sipping black coffee, watching life return, not just to the land, but to the people. The lawsuits, investigations, and indictments would come. And they'd stick. Rick would face federal charges. Maggie would flee the spotlight she'd once begged for. Their HOA would dissolve under the weight of exposed fraud. But those were just headlines. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about resilience. About standing your ground when everyone, tries to move you. It was about honoring a legacy built one damn stone at a time, held together not with concrete, but with character. Pops didn't just build a dam. He built a promise. And I kept it. Families can buy water rights legally just like everyone else has to. Maggie stormed off threatening federal lawsuits. That would never materialize as Miguel's extended family arrived with homemade tamales and cold beer, and Mrs. Chen brought a traditional Chinese tea ceremony to bless the restored creek. I realized something important. This was never about revenge, it was about community, the kind Pops had built, one neighbor at a time, one drought at a time, one act of generosity at a time. The media narrative had shifted completely. Environmental groups hailed the spillway operation as a model for ecosystem restoration. The original veteran floods neighborhood story became community. Reclaim stolen water. Sometimes the truth flows as naturally as water finding its way home. Judge Walsh's courtroom at 2 p.m. was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Media crews, farmers, HOA residents and federal agents filled every seat with overflow crowds watching through the windows. You could feel the electricity in the air. This wasn't just a legal hearing, it was a community reckoning. Maggie arrived with a three-piece suit, Army high-powered Houston attorneys, expert witnesses, and enough legal firepower to take down a small government. She traded her tennis outfit for a conservative black dress and pearls, playing the role of concerned Community leader defending innocent families. I showed up with Amanda wearing a simple button-down shirt and Pop's old cowboy hat. Sometimes the best armor is just being comfortable in your own skin. The gallery was divided like a wedding. Gone wrong. Hoa supporters on the left clutching their Protect Our Kids signs. Foaming community on the right with weathered hands and determined faces. Maggie's attorney opened with dramatic flair, presenting photos of muddy construction sites and claiming $2.7 million in flood damage from my spillway operation. They wheeled in a psychiatrist who'd never met me but was happy to diagnose combat revenge fantasies based on newspaper clippings. Your Honor, the attorney declared, gesturing toward me like I was a war criminal. This disturbed veteran is using military engineering knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He's turned water into a weapon of mass destruction. The courtroom buzzed with whispers until Amanda stood for our response. She presented the 1978 agricultural flood management covenant that legally required seasonal flooding. EPA agent Kim took the stand and testified that my spillway operation had restored natural water flow patterns without causing any actual property damage. Historical photographs proved current water levels matched 60 years of natural seasonal patterns. Here's your final knowledge nugget: legal water rights documentation always trumps recent development claims, especially when you have federal environmental agencies backing your position. Then Tony Riggs took the stand as EPA enforcement officer. His testimony was devastating. The Hoa development had violated 3 separate federal environmental laws, committed systematic insurance fraud, and destroyed protected wildlife habitat. Judge Walsh squirmed in his seat as federal crimes were detailed in his courtroom. You could see him calculating whether his political loyalty to Rick was worth potential federal prosecution for obstruction of justice. The breaking point came when Amanda called Rick as a witness under oath. He admitted to fast-tracking zoning changes while I was deployed overseas and revealed his financial stake in the construction company. When Amanda played the recorded phone conversation about destroying property values, Rick exploded. "This is a federal setup," he screamed, storming toward the exit. "We did nothing wrong." His own words, captured on audio, proved the conspiracy better than any prosecutor could, but the real emotional power came from community testimony. Miguel Santos described 3 generations of farming destroyed by the creek diversion, his voice breaking as he talked about his grandfather's dreams dying with the stolen water. Mrs. Chin showed photographs of her family garden, lush and green before the diversion, brown and withered after. Her quiet dignity spoke louder than any legal argument. Fire Chief Martinez testified that the spillway operation was professionally executed with 0 safety violations. Downstream property owners confirmed their agricultural water access had been fully restored. Then Maggie took the stand for what became her final performance. "He came back from war damaged, Your Honor," she said, pointing at me with trembling fingers. "He's taking revenge on innocent families using psychological warfare against children." She claimed I'd threatened her safety and described the spillway operation as environmental terrorism designed to destroy property values and traumatize residents. When Amanda called me to testify, the courtroom went silent. I presented Pop's journals documenting 40 years of community water sharing, explained my Army Corps engineering calculations, and spoke directly to Judge Walsh. "Your Honor, I didn't flood anybody. I restored a creek that was stolen from my family in this community for 45 years. The mic drop moment came when Amanda presented final evidence documentation of Maggie's Houston Hoa paying $2.3 million in EPA fines for an identical creek diversion scheme. The federal prosecutor stood and announced a criminal investigation into interstate water fraud conspiracy. The courtroom erupted as the scope of the corruption became clear. Judge Walsh had no choice. He denied all restraining order requests, ruled that my spillway operation was legal and beneficial, and ordered the Hoa to cease all interference with federal environmental investigations. His warning to Rick was pointed: "This court will not obstruct lawful federal environmental enforcement." As federal agents escorted Rick from the courthouse while banking investigators served additional warrants, Maggie found herself surrounded by reporters with nowhere to hide. She refused all comment and sped away in her BMW, probably already calling moving companies. I emerged to cheering crowds of farmers, environmentalists, and curious townspeople who'd witnessed justice flowing as naturally as water finding its way Home Amanda announced the federal RICO investigation at an impromptu press conference while Miguel thanked me on behalf of every affected family. My statement was simple: this was never about revenge, it was about doing right by the land and the people who depend on it. 6 months later, justice flowed as naturally as the restored creek. Rick Thornwell pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and got 3 years in federal prison. Maggie faced $8.7 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy faster than water rushing through an open spillway. The construction company paid $12 million in EPA fines and got banned from all federal contract work. The HOA dissolved completely and residents formed a new community association focused on environmental stewardship instead of suburban tyranny. My property value restored to $1.2 million after the federal environmental designation made it more valuable than any suburban development could. The $340,000 settlement from the insurance fraud investigation went to a good cause. I bought Miguel's family farm at tax auction and returned it to him. Tree environmental restoration often increases property values more than development ever could. The community transformation was the real victory. The restored creek now attracts ecotourism, kayaking, birdwatching, and fishing. Where McMansions were supposed to stand, Mrs. Chin's garden became a demonstration site for sustainable agriculture, and 3 downstream farms reported their best crop yields in a decade. The local diner became unofficial headquarters for the Willow Creek Restoration Association, where farmers and environmentalists planned the next fight against corporate water theft. The environmental success exceeded every expectation. Protected Guadalupe populations recovered to pre-diversion levels within 4 months. The Audubon Society documented 12 bird species returning to restored wetland habitat. Texas Parks and Wildlife designated the creek as a critical wildlife corridor, ensuring permanent protection. My spillway operation became a case study in the Army Corps of Engineers training manual. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job correctly. Personally, I found peace I didn't know I was missing. I renovated Pop's farmhouse using sustainable construction techniques, and Sarah moved back from California to help manage our growing agorism business. Amanda and I, well, let's just say fighting environmental crime together creates a pretty strong bond. The ripple effects spread across Texas like water. Finding new channels. Environmental groups use the Willow Creek model to challenge illegal diversions statewide. Federal agencies cite our case in new water rights enforcement guidelines. I've become an unofficial consultant for communities fighting HOA overreach, and the phone rings constantly. We established the Pops Morrison Environmental Scholarship for rural students studying water management. Miguel's daughter Maria was the first recipient, and she's now studying environmental engineering at UT Austin. She wants to protect waterheads across Texas from people like Maggie. The annual Creek Days Festival celebrates restoration and community resilience with local food, environmental education, and veteran support services. We raised money for a water rights legal defense fund that's already helped 6 other communities fight back against corporate theft. My favorite part: kids swimming in the creek where homes were supposed to be built, splashing in water that flows free because a community stood together. Every Sunday, I visit Pop's grave and bring creek water in a mason jar, just like he used to do when he checked the flow after heavy rains. Thanks, Pops, I tell him. The creek's singing again, just like you said it would. The Legacy Project ensures this victory lasts forever. The Willow Creek Conservation Trust now owns development rights to the entire watershed, creating a permanent buffer zone that prevents future commercial development. No one will ever steal this water again. But here's the beautiful twist: Maggie's Houston HOA faced federal RICO prosecution based on our case. 147 families across 3 states filed similar water rights restoration lawsuits. What started as one veteran's fight became a movement for environmental justice nationwide. From my porch each evening, watching that creek flow exactly where it belongs, I'm reminded that some fights are worth everything you've got. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek, but you don't do it alone. You do it with your community, your neighbors, and people who believe clean water belongs to everyone, not just whoever has the best lawyers and the most corrupt city council connections. If you're fighting HOA overreach, environmental destruction, or bureaucratic bullying, don't give up. Document everything, find allies, and Remember, the law is on your side when you're protecting the land for future generations. Drop a comment and tell me your Hoa nightmare story. I read every single one. And reply when I can, because these fights are easier when we support each other. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about communities fighting back against corruption and winning. And remember, your voice matters, your vote matters, and your creek matters too. Next week, I'm telling you about the city that tried to steal my neighbor's solar farm, so she cut power to City Hall during the mayor's wedding reception. That's a story about a different kind of power, and how one engineer turned the lights out on municipal corruption. Water finds a way. Justice finds a way, and communities that fight together win together. Willow Creek flows free, y'all, and it always will.